Some connections don't ask for permission, they arrive quietly, change everything, and leave you wondering how you ever lived without them. The story begins with the narrator grounding us in an ordinary moment, a place where life moves at its own steady rhythm. It could be a quiet bookstore, a sunlit cafe corner, or a late evening class where the room hums with low chatter. The key is to start simple, so the woman's entrance feels like a shift in the air, something that catches his senses before his thoughts even catch up. The narrator notices her in a way that is not instant infatuation but quiet intrigue. He describes her presence not as loud or demanding, but as magnetic in its stillness. Maybe she stands near the window, light outlining the curve of her profile. Maybe she smooths her sleeve or tucks a strand of hair back, gestures that seem ordinary but, to him, carry grace born of confidence. He doesn't know her, yet he feels her calmness ripple across the space like the scent of something familiar and comforting. Emotionally, the goal here is to draw the audience into his perspective. He doesn't just see a woman, he senses the weight of her years, the lived experience in her poise, the quiet assurance in her movements. This isn't a gaze of judgment or comparison but one of wonder, like stumbling upon a page in a book that speaks to you more deeply than expected. The moment should slow down. He notices small sensory details, the faint sound of her laugh when she responds to someone nearby, the way she places her hand on a table as if grounding herself, or the rhythm of her footsteps across a polished floor. Every description emphasizes presence over appearance. She feels alive, real, approachable yet untouchable at the same time. Narrative progression in this first part is subtle. He doesn't approach her, not yet. He allows the feeling of noticing her to settle, to shape itself into quiet curiosity. There's no rush, no sudden confession of attraction. Instead, there's a lingering thought he carries with him, the awareness of someone who seems both familiar and completely unknown. The tension introduced is internal. He wonders why he noticed her at all. Why her, in this ordinary moment, when the world is full of passing faces? The seed of connection is planted here, the understanding that sometimes, one glance can carry the weight of a beginning, even if neither person knows it yet. This keynote sets the stage for the slow build. The audience feels what he feels, an ordinary moment suddenly tinged with something extraordinary, quiet yet unforgettable. Imagine a setting that invites stillness rather than chaos. Perhaps they are seated at nearby tables in a cafe, the hum of low conversations wrapping them in a soft cocoon. Or perhaps it's a quiet break after a community event, the air scented faintly with coffee or rain on the pavement outside. The details here matter, they create an atmosphere where two strangers can comfortably linger without pressure. The narrator notices how close she is now, and the shift in proximity heightens his awareness. He describes not just what he sees, but what it feels like. The warmth of her presence near him. The way her perfume, faint and understated, carries a trace of something floral. The texture of her voice when she speaks, steady, warm, with a softness that settles into him. The narrative goal here is to let the audience feel the slowness of their first real exchange. Their conversation should be ordinary in subject, perhaps about the book she's reading, or a comment on the weather, or the event they both attended, yet extraordinary in how it lingers. Neither of them rushes to leave. Each reply stretches a little longer than it needs to, like they're both quietly testing whether this moment might be worth holding on to. The sensory anchor of this part could be a small act of contact. Maybe she passes him a napkin, their fingertips brushing. Maybe they both reach for the same item on a shared table and pause, smiling at the brief overlap. The touch is fleeting, but it sparks something noticeable, a warmth that neither of them names aloud but both silently register. Emotionally, this part builds trust. The narrator doesn't overstep. Instead, he stays present, listening more than speaking, observing the depth in her words. He begins to realize that she carries a quiet vulnerability beneath her confidence, the way her eyes soften when she talks about her children, or the wistful smile when she mentions something from the past. The tension introduced is subtle but growing, he is aware of their age difference now. It doesn't discourage him, but it makes him cautious. He wonders if his attention will be welcomed or dismissed. Yet the way she continues to engage, with a slight tilt of her head and the faintest of smiles, assures him that this connection, however fragile, is real. By now, the initial curiosity and gentle exchange of words have settled into something warmer, something that makes silence between them feel less like distance and more like safety. In this part, the story slows further, leaning into intimacy not through touch but through truth, the kind of truths people rarely share with strangers. The setting should be calm, perhaps a quiet corner at the cafe after the crowd has thinned, or a park bench where the evening light softens into gold. Wherever they are, the world around them grows quieter, almost as if giving them permission to speak more openly. This backdrop matters. Stillness outside mirrors the stillness inside, a moment suspended in time where two people can risk honesty. The narrator listens as she begins to talk, not about trivialities but about something that carries weight. It might be a small confession, how difficult it is to balance strength with loneliness, how sometimes even the most confident woman feels unseen, or how she carries regrets she rarely voices. Her words are not rehearsed, they fall gently, almost hesitantly, like she is surprised to be saying them aloud. The narrator observes everything, the way her eyes lower as she speaks, how her fingers unconsciously trace the rim of her glass or twist a ring on her hand, gestures that betray her vulnerability even as her voice stays steady. He feels the shift. This isn't just casual conversation anymore. She is letting him glimpse a part of her world that is carefully hidden from most. For him, the emotional goal is twofold. He feels protective, wanting to ease her burden, yet also uncertain if it's his place to step closer. He realizes the age difference not as a barrier but as a marker of what she has endured, a life fuller, heavier, shaped by choices he has yet to face. That awareness humbles him, even as it draws him nearer. This part should emphasize sensory closeness without physical contact. The audience should feel the weight of her words through sound and atmosphere, the hushed tone of her voice, the faint catch of breath when she admits something painful, the silence that follows, holding everything between them. The tension here is delicate. He wonders if offering comfort will intrude, if his empathy will be welcomed or if it will only remind her of the gap between them. Yet her eyes meet his, soft, searching, and that moment tells him more than her words. She isn't pushing him away. She's letting him stay. The story now shifts into a space where silence carries as much weight as dialogue. After her quiet confession, there's a softness between them, an unspoken permission to be present in each other's company. They don't need to fill every pause with words. Instead, the air hums with awareness, each breath and glance charged with quiet tension. The setting should echo this intimacy. Perhaps they are still in that cafe, but the lights have dimmed and the background noise has faded into distant hums. Or maybe they've stepped outside, where the evening breeze cools the skin, carrying the scent of wet pavement after a light rain. Wherever it is, the space feels smaller now, not because it has shrunk, but because their attention is drawn so completely toward each other. This part hinges on the first meaningful touch. It doesn't need to be dramatic. In fact, the smaller the gesture, the more powerful its effect. Maybe she shifts her seat slightly closer, her shoulder brushing against his. Maybe he notices her adjusting something, her scarf slipping, a cup tipping, and his hand instinctively moves to steady hers. The contact is brief but electrifying, the kind that burns into memory far longer than it lasts in reality. The narrator describes this touch with sensory richness. He feels the warmth of her skin against his, the delicate firmness of her fingers, or the brush of fabric where their shoulders meet. He notices how time seems to stretch in that instant, how his heart trips over itself, how silence becomes deafening in the wake of something so simple yet so loaded. Emotionally, the effect is immediate. She doesn't pull away, and he doesn't rush. Instead, there's a quiet acknowledgement in the way her hand lingers a fraction of a second longer than it needs to, or how her breath seems to catch before she looks away with a small smile, not embarrassed, but aware. The tension in this part comes from restraint. Both of them feel it, that pull toward closeness, but neither dares to move further. The narrator wonders if crossing that invisible line would undo the fragile trust they've built. She wonders if allowing this young man to matter to her is a risk she can bear. Their hesitations clash and merge, creating a space thick with unspoken desire and unvoiced fear. Every slow burn romance must carry a shadow of doubt, and this part is where the warmth they've shared collides with the weight of reality. After the softness of that near touch, both the narrator and the woman find themselves retreating inward, overwhelmed by the implications of what just happened. The setting should carry this shift in tone. If they're still together, perhaps it's later that evening, the cafe now closing, lights dimming, chairs stacking. Or if they've stepped outside, maybe they walk under streetlights, their footsteps echoing in the hush of near-empty streets. The atmosphere feels heavier, not unfriendly, but tinged with distance, as if something unspoken has settled between them. The narrator feels the shift first. He notices how her voice, once warm and flowing, has cooled into shorter answers. Her smile remains polite, but it no longer reaches her eyes. He wonders if the brush of his hand, that fleeting contact, has startled her, reminding her of boundaries she can't allow herself to cross. His thoughts spiral with questions. Did he push too far without meaning to? Did she suddenly see him not as a kindred spirit, but as a boy trespassing into a space he doesn't belong? From her side, the conflict runs deeper. She has let herself feel something rare, something she hasn't allowed in years, but the weight of society's gaze presses against her ribs like an invisible hand. She worries about the whispers of others, about what it would mean to be seen with someone his age. The vulnerability she revealed earlier now feels exposed, almost dangerous. To pull back feels safer, even though her heart protests with every step of distance she creates. This tension is expressed in the smallest gestures, the way she avoids his eyes when he speaks, the way her hand stays firmly in her lap instead of resting near his, the way silence stretches longer than it should. The narrator senses it all, each sign striking him like a quiet rejection, though she hasn't spoken the words aloud. Emotionally, this part must feel fragile. The bond they've built trembles under the weight of hesitation, threatening to break. He wants to reach for her hand again, to assure her he means no harm, but fear holds him back. She wants to tell him that the warmth she felt was real, but shame ties her tongue. After the tension of hesitation, the story moves into a space where the weight of silence becomes unbearable. Both of them feel the ache of distance, yet both know that what they've shared cannot simply be erased. In this part, one of them takes the risk to speak truth, not in grand declarations, but in words soft enough to be real. The setting should feel still, almost sacred. Maybe they've stepped outside and found themselves beneath a canopy of trees, where the night breeze stirs gently through the branches. Or perhaps they sit in the half-light of a closing cafe, the last traces of golden lamplight painting their faces. Wherever it is, the world feels paused, just the two of them, and the unspoken waiting to be voiced. It begins with hesitation. He sees her gaze drift away, her lips parted as if she wants to say something but doesn't. He feels his chest tighten with the fear that she will walk away without ever looking back. And then, perhaps it's him, or perhaps it's her, who chooses to break the silence. The words are simple. Maybe he says, "I don't want you to think I was careless with what I felt earlier." Or she whispers, almost reluctantly, "I'm not used to letting anyone see me this closely." The exact phrasing doesn't matter as much as the tone, quiet, trembling, but anchored in truth. The narrator describes this moment with sharp detail, the way her breath shivers in the cool air, the way her fingers tighten around the edge of her sleeve, the flicker of her eyes as they meet his. It isn't a confession of love, it's something more vulnerable, an acknowledgement of connection. The emotional goal here is release. The audience should feel the exhale that comes when both of them stop pretending that nothing has happened. For him, honesty is a way of proving that his presence is not shallow curiosity, but respect. For her, honesty is a surrender to the truth she has been resisting, that being near him feels alive in a way she thought she had lost. The tension remains, but it softens. They don't resolve everything, but they allow themselves to name what lingers between them. The silence that follows is no longer heavy, it feels lighter, more bearable, filled with possibility rather than fear. Every slow burn romance deserves to end not with fireworks, but with stillness, the kind of moment that feels truer because of its quietness. After honesty has been spoken, after hesitation has been faced, the story moves toward resolution. Not the resolution of happily ever after, but of happily right now. The setting should reflect calm and safety. If they're outside, perhaps they find themselves sitting on a park bench under soft street lamps, the night sky pale with stars just beginning to show. If indoors, maybe it's the last lingering table in the cafe, the world around them emptied, leaving only their voices and the hush of closing hours. The backdrop should feel intimate without being forced, as though the world has stepped aside to give them this moment. The resolution comes not from grand gestures, but from presence. He leans back slightly, not crowding her, simply letting his shoulder rest near hers. She allows the closeness, tilting ever so slightly so that their arms touch. It's nothing more than the brush of fabric against fabric, but the narrator describes the warmth that spreads through him, a comfort that settles deeper than any words could. Then, perhaps, she lets her hand rest loosely in her lap, fingers just barely open. Without hesitation, he lets his hand slide gently beside hers, not grasping but offering. When her fingers curl into his, it's soft, natural, almost instinctive, a gesture that speaks of acceptance rather than declaration. The emotional effect of this contact is profound. He feels her steadiness, her quiet strength, and the trust she offers in letting him this close. She feels his sincerity, the way he doesn't demand but simply stays, giving her room to choose. In that small gesture, they both understand, whatever comes, they have crossed from strangers into something deeper. Dialogue, if any, should be minimal. A soft line like, "This feels right," or her whispering, "I don't know where this leads, but I don't want it to end here." Words that don't solve everything, but that affirm the connection. The final image is one of calm. Perhaps they sit in silence, hands entwined, listening to the night sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves. Or maybe they share a quiet laugh, the sound carrying into the stillness like a promise that they will face what comes together.